The hum of the jet engines was steady, almost comforting. Nathan Carr leaned back in his seat, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit as he gazed out the small oval window. The clouds were thick beneath them, a bed of white that stretched to the horizon like a frozen ocean. He glanced at the watch Mara had given him before she passed, a small analog thing, cracked on one edge, but he still wore it every day. Nathan wasn't just a businessman flying to Anchorage for a clean energy summit. He had once been something else, something forged in fire and shadow. A Tier 1 operator, part of a covert military unit that didn't officially exist. He'd seen deserts stained in blood, heard the screams of villages, watched men disappear into the night and never return. After 20 years of service, he came home with a chest full of ribbons and a heart full of ghosts. Civilian life wasn't easy. For years, he'd felt like a stranger in his own home. His senses too sharp, his silence too loud. But he had learned to build again, not just companies and systems, but himself. He started a logistics firm that specialized in emergency relief, fast, precise, and efficient. It gave his life structure, a sense of purpose, and something to focus on when the nights got long. That day, as the plane cut through the frigid northern air, Nathan had no idea his old instincts would be needed again, not in a boardroom, but in a fight for survival. The first jolt hit like a punch in the gut. The cabin lights flickered, coffee splashed across tray tables. A baby 2 rows ahead started to cry. Nathan felt it immediately. That unmistakable shift in gravity, the lurch that told him something was very, very wrong. Then, the alarms began. "Brace!" the flight attendant screamed, knuckles white on the overhead rail. Oxygen masks fell like grotesque fruit from the ceiling. The plane was tilting, one engine clearly gone, the other sputtering like a dying animal. Time slowed. Nathan's hands moved automatically, mask over his face, arms braced, body coiled. He knew the statistics, knew how few survived impact in a terrain like Alaska, knew this might be the final chapter in a life lived on borrowed time. The crash was fire and ice. A deafening scream of tearing metal, the sharp snap of wings sheared by treetops, and then silence, a vacuum, complete and consuming. When Nathan came to, everything hurt. He was upside down. Snow and blood and twisted steel surrounded him. The fuselage was cracked open like a ribcage. Smoke curled toward the gray sky, and the air smelled of jet fuel, burned rubber, and something worse. He staggered out of the wreckage, a gash across his temple, 3 ribs cracked, but alive. Miraculously, around him, others moaned. He did what he could, dragged 2 survivors from the wreck, stabilized another with pieces of a shattered food tray, but help didn't come that day, or the next. On the 3rd day, the weather turned. With visibility near zero and no more supplies, Nathan knew they wouldn't all make it waiting. He studied the terrain, estimated their rough crash location based on flight path, and decided to move. Alone. He'd trained for this once, in jungles, deserts, highlands, but nothing prepared him for the raw desolation of the Alaskan wilderness. He walked for 2 days before he found the bear. At first he thought it was dead. The snow was blood-streaked, the massive shape barely moving. It was a grizzly, and it had clearly been in some kind of fight. Deep wounds along its flank, blood crusted around its muzzle. It tried to lift its head when Nathan approached, but failed, collapsing again into the snow with a wheezing growl. He could have left it. Most people would, but Nathan wasn't most people. He crouched nearby, gauging the injuries from a safe distance. Infection, dehydration, maybe broken bones. The bear was breathing, though barely. Nathan scanned the tree line for threats, then carefully backed away, returning an hour later with melted snow and a salvaged bottle and some of the last protein bars from his pack. Over the next 3 days, he stayed. He built a crude lean-to for shelter, rationed his supplies, and nursed the bear the best he could. He didn't know why. Maybe he saw in its eyes the same kind of pain he once carried. Or maybe, for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The bear began to recover, slowly. Its eyes cleared. It moved enough to lick snow for water. Nathan stayed just far enough not to be seen as a threat, but close enough to matter. He spoke to it sometimes, half laughing at himself. "You and me, huh? A washed-up soldier and a wounded grizzly. There's a story no one will believe." By the 7th day, the bear rose to its feet. They locked eyes. Nathan stood, not moving, not speaking, only watching. The bear let out a low huff, then turned and lumbered into the trees, leaving only paw prints in the snow. Nathan didn't follow, but he didn't feel alone either. He adjusted his pack and kept moving. The nearest ranger station was still over 30 miles away. The terrain would only get worse. But something in him had changed. The pain was still there, the cold biting and real. But he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was listening, watching, and somewhere in the back of his mind he knew the bear wasn't gone. Not really. The cold settled into his bones like an old betrayal. Each step through the snow was a negotiation with pain, ribs grinding, muscles stiff from overuse. But Nathan kept moving, one foot after the other, trekking through frozen pines and jagged ridgelines, always checking his bearings, counting his breaths. He estimated 25 miles left to the nearest ranger outpost, maybe more if he miscalculated. His emergency transponder had shattered in the crash, and the terrain made satellite access impossible. This was wilderness in its purest form, the kind that didn't care who you were or what medals you wore once upon a time. 3 days passed. He moved by daylight and made crude camps at night, shallow pits dug beneath wind-blocking ledges, insulated with branches and strips of thermal foil scavenged from his crash gear. Food was gone by the 2nd morning. Water came from melting snow, bitter and metallic tasting from his charred aluminum pot. He hadn't seen another human being since he left the wreck, but in the silence, something stirred. At first, it was just a shadow in the trees, then a shape, movement, low to the ground, fluid, coordinated, wolves, at least 4, maybe 5. They kept their distance, clever and cautious, watching, assessing. Nathan recognized the behavior instantly. A classic test. Determine threat level, wait for weakness. They weren't hunting him yet, but they would. He'd seen it before in Afghanistan. How jackals moved through the desert, how packs operated in rhythm, the intelligence behind their patience. The wolves were no different. The following night, they closed in. He didn't hear them until the first snarl. Low, guttural, close, too close. Nathan spun, flashlight in hand, the narrow beam slicing through a swirl of snow. Eyes flashed, golden and terrible. A growl to his left, movement to his right. They were flanking. Textbook. He grabbed a broken branch, charred at the tip, and ignited it with the last of his waterproof matches. The fire bought him time, not safety. He swung wildly, flame hissing. One wolf lunged and caught his arm in a glancing bite, tearing through his jacket and drawing blood. Nathan shouted, kicked, fought like a cornered animal. The torch fell. Snow hissed. Darkness surged. And then thunder. Not literal thunder, but something just as earth-shaking. A roar that didn't belong to the storm. A sound that split the trees and hearts alike. The wolves froze. Another roar, closer. The tree line exploded, and there he was. The bear, the same grizzly Nathan had helped. Scars still fresh, eyes burning with primal fury. He charged through the snow with terrifying speed, massive paws pounding like drum beats, teeth bared. The wolves didn't wait for a second act. They scattered, some vanishing into the trees, others howling as they fled. The pack dissolved like smoke. Nathan stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding arm. The bear stopped 10 feet from him. They stared at one another. Man and beast, survivor and savior. For a long moment, nothing moved. Nathan could hear the blood in his ears, the wind, the beat of his own battered heart. "You remembered me," he whispered. The bear exhaled, a deep gust of steam in the cold, then turned slowly, deliberately, and began to walk. Nathan followed. For the next 2 days, the bear never wandered far, sometimes just ahead on the path, sometimes parallel, visible between the trees. He never came too close again, never threatened, but his presence was clear, a guardian ghost of the wild. Nathan began to sleep again, deeply, as if something greater watched over him. At dawn on the 5th morning since the attack, the bear was gone. No prints, no sound, just the forest, quiet and silver under a fresh layer of snow. Nathan didn't feel abandoned. He felt protected. That afternoon, staggering and delirious, Nathan found the ranger station. A skeletal cabin with a working radio and a faded map nailed to the wall. He collapsed inside and sent a distress signal. Rescue arrived by helicopter 12 hours later. They found him wrapped in thermal blankets, half conscious but alive, bleeding, bruised but unbroken. They asked how he'd survived the wild. He said only, "I wasn't alone." Nathan hadn't cried when they lifted him into the helicopter. He hadn't cried when they stitched his arm or when he watched the blackened wreck of the jet disappear beneath the clouds. But when he stood under the hot water of the hospital shower, the first in nearly a week, and saw his reflection in the fogged-up mirror, he broke. Not for the pain. Not for the hunger or the cold or the wolves, but for the bear. Back home in Washington, life resumed in a way that felt almost obscene. His assistant had rescheduled the conference. Clients sent emails expressing, quote, relief and admiration. His story hit the local news. Ex-Green Beret survives Alaskan wilderness after crash. They wanted him to do interviews, podcasts, even a book deal. Nathan refused them all. He didn't care about the headlines. The real story wasn't something that could be packaged into a 12-minute segment between commercials. He returned to his penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, sat on his modern leather couch, surrounded by smart home technology and untouched scotch, and felt utterly foreign to it all. The city was loud, artificial, bright in all the wrong ways. Each night he dreamed of snow, of wolves, of deep brown eyes watching him from the tree line. He tried to go back to business, to board meetings and fiscal reports, but something inside him had shifted. He found himself drifting off during calls, sketching the bear in the margins of notepads, researching grizzlies in Alaska, their territories, habits, behaviors. At first, he told himself it was gratitude. He owed the animal his life. But he knew it was more than that. The connection they'd shared, fleeting, wordless, yet undeniable, had anchored something deep within him, something ancient, something unspoken for too long. He reached out to wildlife preservation groups. He donated anonymously to conservation programs in Alaska. He hired a small team to investigate bear populations near the crash zone. A few of them found prints and claw marks, but no conclusive sightings. Then, late one evening, Nathan found a local wildlife photographer's blog post, "The Guardian of the Pass," the title read. It described a scarred grizzly, seen occasionally by hikers near a remote trail in the Talkeetna Mountains. Not aggressive, enigmatic, unafraid of humans. One even claimed it had chased off a pack of wolves stalking a lost teenager. Nathan printed the article and framed it. Not for proof, but as a reminder. Months passed. The seasons changed. His body healed. His business ran without him, more or less. But something had taken root. One morning he visited a local veterans shelter. He brought food and supplies but stayed to listen to stories from men who, like him, carried invisible wounds. He began to volunteer, quietly, regularly. No press. No praise. He told one of them, a young amputee with haunted eyes, "The wild doesn't care about your past, only how you fight through the present." Present. It was the first time Nathan had spoken openly about his time in Alaska. The young man nodded slowly. "Did you fight your way back?" Nathan smiled. "No," he said. "Something fought for me. And with that, he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. He had to return. The air in Anchorage tasted the same, sharp, metallic, and alive. Nathan stood at the edge of the small regional airstrip, dressed not in the tailored suits of his boardroom days, but in old cargo pants, a waxed canvas jacket, and the same battered boots he'd worn during the crash. He had come back, not as a survivor, not as a soldier, but as a man chasing a whisper. His pilot, a grizzled bushman named Eli, gave him a skeptical look as they loaded Nathan's pack into the single-prop plane. "You really think you'll find it again?" Eli asked. Nathan smiled faintly. "No, I don't expect to." "Then why go?" "Because I have to." The plane soared over snowfields and jagged ridges, glaciers like frozen rivers trapped in time. Hours later, they landed on a narrow patch of cleared ice near the site of the old wreck, now buried under months of snowfall. Nathan stepped onto the tundra, feeling the silence settle around him like a blanket. He walked for hours. The landmarks returned in fragments: the ridge where he'd built a fire, the stand of black spruce where the wolves had circled. He reached the clearing where he'd first met the bear, now layered in silence and shadow. He waited. 1 day passed, then 2, then 3. Each evening he lit a small fire and sat beside it, speaking aloud. Not to the wind, but to something he hoped was listening. "I don't know why you helped me. Maybe we both needed saving." On the 5th day, as dusk rolled in and frost painted the edges of his beard, he heard it. Not a roar, not a growl, just the steady crunch of something large moving through the snow. He turned slowly. There, between the trees, stood the bear, older now, slower, but unmistakable. The scar across his shoulder still visible. His gaze just as steady, just as wild. Nathan stood. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the bear took one step forward, and another. Not threatening, not territorial, just present. Nathan knelt slowly and reached into his pack. He pulled out a small, carefully wrapped bundle. Inside was a hand-carved totem, a bear etched from dark wood, with a wolf at its feet and a man at its side. He placed it gently on the snow between them. The bear sniffed the air, took a step closer, and lowered his head. Their eyes met again, not as predator and prey, not as animal and man, but as brothers of the same long war. Nathan whispered, "Thank you." The bear lingered a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the woods, snow falling softly in his wake. Nathan stayed until morning. When he finally left, he didn't feel grief. He felt grace. Years later, the foundation Nathan started, Echo North, now supports wilderness rescue operations, wildlife rehabilitation, and veteran wilderness therapy programs across the country. At the entrance to its main lodge, nestled at the base of the Talkeetna Mountains, stands a bronze statue of a man and a bear, back to back, facing the horizon. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "Not all saviors speak. Some simply stand beside you in the silence when you need them most." Sometimes, in the early morning fog, rangers report seeing a massive grizzly watching from the distant ridge, then disappearing into the trees. They call him the Guardian. And Nathan, now older, quieter, just smiles when he hears the stories, because he knows the truth. Some bonds are forged, not in words, but in the wild, and they never break.